line where Alex Jones is right. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, shitposters, activists, and people of the internet, thank you for joining again for another episode of O'Donnell for Liberty. As always, I'm your host, Justin. Before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications to make sure you can keep up to date with all of our future content. And if you enjoy the program, you can be an early supporter by following the Patreon link in the description and signing up to join our production team. If you want to keep in touch between shows, you can follow me on social media and join our community Discord channel by following the links in the description as well. Tonight, we're going to be talking bottom unity and left libertarianism, and especially left coast left libertarian, with a guest who once even ran for Congress as a Democrat. We're going to take questions, so make sure you hit the like button, make sure you leave some comments, tell us what you think in chat, and give a warm welcome to tonight's guest, Heidi Briones. Heidi, thank you for joining tonight. How's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me, Justin.
So, give us your story. Like, you ran for Congress as a Democrat. You call yourself a left libertarian. You talk about bottom unity, and you yell at me and Reed on Twitter for being mean to Marianne Williamson. But like,
that was all in good fun, but yes.
So, what's your background? Like, where do you come from? What got you involved in politics?
Sure, yeah. I come from a fairly political background. I think my first job was working in the California state legislature as a legislative aide in high school, as an intern. So my aunt was actually a state senator and kind of got involved there. And, her husband is a political consultant, just kind of been sort of a lifelong Democrat, but I also grew up in Orange County, which is highly Republican. So there's that kind of mix going on there, and really got more into things as far as like civil libertarianism when I was in college. They say that if you want to become a libertarian or if you want to care about liberty, spend a night in jail or something like that, or some kind of quote like that. So I was actually, it's pretty kind of funny story, but I was detained. It was like a drunk in public type of thing, but it was completely unfair, and I actually got it like completely expunged. Like, you can't find any record of it because it was completely illegal how they detained me. They basically I was sleeping in my dorm room. They found one of my friends who was staying with me but had gone outside and partied like without my knowledge and got really drunk, passed out in public, and the campus security basically found her, and they were like, who are you? Like, do you go here? And she's like, no, I'm staying with Heidi. Like, she's in there. And so I'm like, thanks a lot, man. But anyway, so they go and they knock on my door, and I don't answer. They go and get the key. They go in. They have my RA, like, wake me up, pull me outside. And then basically I wasn't cooperative in their minds, and they arrested me for drunk in public and took my friend home, even though she was the one that was initially drunk in public. So kind of after that night, I was like, wait a fucking minute. like, this is bullshit. Like, losing,
drunk in public for sleeping peacefully in your dorm room.
Exactly. Yeah. Not only that, they went into my room. They took all of my weed and flushed it, or whatever the hell they did with it. But they took all of my weed. And yeah, it was completely illegal. They had absolutely no right to enter my dorm room and pull me out and arrest me for being, intoxicated in public. So that happened. And I just really kind of awoke to the fact that, yeah, your liberty is right. It can be taken away from you at any moment, any time. I started an ACLU group on campus back when the ACLU actually fought for civil liberties, back when they actually did their fucking job. And so
how far the ACLU has fallen from fighting for the free speech of Nazis to defending mandates and telling people to line up to get on the train.
What the fuck? Yeah, I mean, it's been a complete 180. I mean, it's just obvious that they've got some, whatever donors that they're trying to please. It's just clearly obvious. But they've been going the wrong way for a while. So, but at the time, they were actually cool, and they actually did do a lot of things. And I educated a lot of people about their rights on campus. This is what cops can do. This is what they can't do. This is what the campus security can do. This is what they can't do. They can't enter your room. It's the same. As a police officer, they can't go in your car. I went around educating people about this. So got, kind of into activism, and then also was part of the anti-war group on campus. We actually kicked military recruiters off of campus. That group was mostly socialist, actually. So like it's always been weird for me. It's like like in a way, like I'm in these left-wing groups, and then I'm kind of in these like civil libertarian corners, and it's tough. So I mean, left libertarianism, I guess it's the best way I can describe myself ideologically at this point, but that sort of led me down that path. And as far as running for Congress, I was just inspired by Andrew Yang's campaign. Got really into that. Basically, I'm a UBI person, so into it, was really just got excited about his campaign. When he dropped out, I was like, I'm going to run for Congress, like on UBI. Let's just see what happens. Let's just do this. And that was just really fun. It went fairly well. It was a 4-way race with an incredibly strong incumbent, but I at least came in second place. I beat out the other competitors, and I think it was just really fun. We did really well. It was during the very beginning of COVID, so I could do almost zero campaigning, which really sucked. So everything was online. So that really, put a nail in the coffin at some point, but it was cool. I mean, Marianne Williamson actually endorsed me, so that's why I do have a soft spot for her, besides other things. Like, I'm also into her spiritual work, but yeah, that sort of led me down that path there. Mm-hmm.
I had a real soft spot for Marianne too. My whole push was to try and get Marianne on the show at one point or another to defend her views and to actually get pushback on what she was parroting Bill Kristol about. It wasn't until she blocked me yesterday for no goddamn reason that I stopped having a soft spot for Marianne. But back to your UBI thing, back to your UBI stand. You were a fan of Andrew Yang. UBI, universal basic income, is something that's antithetical to libertarian economics and what libertarians, right libertarians, Rothbardians, Hayekans, people with the Libertarian Party, it's complete antithesis of the economic views of what they promote and what they perceive. Yet you told me that when you were working with Yang's campaign and volunteering with Yang's campaign, people attacked Yang and said that UBI was a libertarian plant idea that they were trying to sneak into the Democratic Party. Yeah. How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still on Twitter, but there's an AOC video where somebody asked her about it at an event, and they're like, what do you think about UBI? Are you for that? And she's like, well, there's certain types of UBI that are okay, and that's only if they stack onto everything else that we already have. But I'm just going to say there are certain plans out there that are definitely what they call a libertarian Trojan horse, that are just meant to destroy the welfare state. So then that just became this whole thing where Andrew Yang's a libertarian, and he's is the Trojan horse, and we're trying to get rid of the welfare state. And I'm kind of well, yeah, I mean, in a way, that's the goal, right? Do you really want people dependent on welfare? You know how destructive that's been to society. Do you know, how bad that is in general, and how means testing harms so many people? And basically, our argument is that a universal basic income is more libertarian than the welfare state. If you fall into the more left libertarian side of things and you're pro UBI, I think that's sort of where we do want it to lead to, because it's better for society and it's more humane than having people dependent on actual welfare programs.
I think I know where AOC was coming from, and AOC is somebody who I would describe as educated but not intelligent, where she knows the words to say, she knows what to reference, and she can speak very eloquently about a subject that she has no clue what the hell she's talking about. I think what she's referencing is something that Friedman had said very early on in regards to economics and the welfare state, where he said that the only defense of UBI, where UBI would be an improvement upon the existing welfare state by offering UBI in exchange for repealing the entirety of the welfare state, but that UBI in and of itself was still a non-libertarian idea because it still required the redistribution of wealth by force.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, to me, I think that, it's definitely not economic libertarianism in its purest form, but I do think that it's certainly more libertarian than, a welfare state and having that type of a structure. I think that it allows for more freedom. People have more choice for what they're going to do with the money, and if you set it up correctly, I think that you can solve for, most forms of, basically theft by taxation. Depends on how you have the taxes set up. I mean, did you follow Zoltan Ishtan's campaign at all?
I tried, but I couldn't get past the "dude, where's my car" meme. Like I tried, because he was curious, he was interesting, he was different, he was running as a libertarian, and I just couldn't get past the Zoltan, and like his transhumanist perspective. Like he ran a campaign for president to funnel all the money in the world into research into turning us into cyborgs and androids.
Yeah, that part was definitely a little out there. But he had sort of a libertarian UBI setup, which was interesting. I'm not sure if I fully agree with it or see how it would work, but basically it was like renting out federal land, so it'd be a tax-free UBI. So essentially we have all this federal land, we could rent it out, private companies basically lease it out, and we could have that money distributed as a dividend. So technically there'd be no taxes. So that's like one setup. I mean, there's certainly more and less libertarian ways to set up a UBI. But yeah, in my view, I think that we're headed towards a direction where it's going to happen. And, I don't want it to be in a state of desperation. I do think eventually we'll have to do a UBI. I just think we will with automation. I don't know if it's in my lifetime or not, but I would rather us set it up correctly and get ahead of it and try to actually do it in a way that's not out of desperation when people are like rioting on the streets because they have no jobs, no basic income, no needs met at all.
Well, as Masha's pointing out in the chat, like coercion is more libertarian than slavery, but that doesn't make it libertarian. At the end of the day, a UBI system, as we see it and as we talk about it, is going to require the coercion of government force behind it. And I mean, how do you deal with that? How do you come up with a system that preserves a social safety net but takes force out of the equation?
That preserves the social safety net? I mean, the goal is to really make it as simple as just giving people money. If that's what you mean, or do you mean more of the taxation portion?
Here's the thing. What AOC was getting at is the libertarian Trojan horse is to put UBI in and take away everything else. By everything else, she means Social Security, she means Medicare, she means Medicaid, she means food stamps, she means any other state welfare program, she means free lunch at schools. All of that stuff is something that would be replaced. That is the total welfare state, and we look at that as the social safety net. And generally the left and liberals will argue that we need the social safety net because the less better off among us and the less fortunate among us can't compete and can't provide for themselves in a competitive market where the purchasing power has been depleted. Now, we say their purchasing power has been depleted through inflation and artificial means where the government has restricted their earning capability with minimum wage laws and labor restrictions and all sorts of things, but they just say it doesn't matter what caused it, it was happened. How do you pitch to the left that you're still protecting people if you're stripping away all of that?
We're not necessarily stripping it all away to start. My plan was to keep what's in place and stack it at the beginning and have it be opt-in. So you don't, you could opt in and then you'd be opting out of cash-like welfare programs such as food stamps, those types of things. But things that you've paid into, such as Social Security, I wouldn't touch those personally. That was my plan. And my also idea about it is that a social safety net is nice, but I think that an income floor is much better, and having it be universal and not means tested and not something that you have to go through red tape and bureaucracy and have corruption and all of these other things eating away at the funds. I mean, you saw that with the housing, what's going on with housing right now, where only 10% of people that qualified for, housing assistance received it. I mean, that's a huge problem, I think. I think that, essentially, if you have an actual income floor, you don't necessarily need to have a safety net that often doesn't get used, period, or when it does, it gets abused, or it doesn't go to the right people that actually need it, or there's people on the edges that don't receive it because their income's just like $100 more than it was than what they needed it to be, or they made $200,000 last year, but this year they made zero. So those types of things are, I think, highly bureaucratic, and I think it's personally, give someone more freedom to give them a basic income all the time, rather than having them have to go and fill out tons of paperwork and deal with, government every single time they need help for something, rather than just being able to solve it immediately with things that they already have.
Well, so the idea of an income floor relies really on the idea that the income, that the value of that, the purchasing power and the parity of that income is going to be stable over time. How do you adjust something like that for the realization and the reality that the US dollar and currency as we know it is not stable, and the fluctuation isn't a downward trend, and that people are losing their savings to inflation? The dollar number stays the same, but their purchasing power goes down year over year. And people on Social Security who had saved their entire lives aren't able to make ends meet because what was a middle class income 40 years ago is well below the poverty line today.
Well, I mean, you can adjust it for inflation, certainly. I mean, the UBI is not meant to be, somebody's entire income. I mean, it's basically like $1,000 to $2,000 a month tops. Certainly, people are going to need more money than that, and still need to be productive, and still, need to work and do everything they're doing. I mean, yes, there is inflation is a problem. Deflation can also be a problem as well. And that's a whole different road to go down as far as like monetary theory and the role of the Fed and all of that. But it really depends, I think, on how you set it up. I've heard some interesting things about setting it up as like a transaction tax or a payment tax. And I've heard, the VAT, of course, and having a VAT kind of scale up, be like a sales tax that can eventually replace income tax, in my view. So there's different ways that it can be set up. Inflation certainly is a concern. You'd have to somehow index it to inflation. You'd have to somehow, solve for that. Frankly, it's a little deeper conversation than I'm prepared to have as far as monetary theory. But there are ways to essentially index it to inflation to solve for that. But the main thing is that it's not meant to be an end-all be-all, and it's not supposed to replace people's normal ways of making income. It may for some, but in general, people will still be, needing other income beyond $1,000 a month. It's not realistic to think that's going to, stop productivity and the normal means of production that are going on, which basically help with the dollar. But the value of the dollar going down is a huge problem that goes into oil and all kinds of other things that I'm not sure we want to go all the way down, but it depends how far.
Well, and that's the reality of it is. And when you're pitching these things to libertarians, you have to realize that the God and gospel of libertarianism is the market and market response and market action. And when we look at things like you're creating an income floor, you're making sure there is a baseline of income for everybody. What you're really doing is you're attempting to artificially inflate everyone's purchasing power in an open and free market. And the market's going to respond to that by reducing their purchasing power with increased prices. And we're already seeing that with rents. With that new housing assistance programs, combined with artificial scarcity because of zoning laws and construction prohibition, we're seeing rents skyrocket to levels that they're unheard of in even rural communities around this country. And all the people who could afford rent perfectly 2 years ago are all of a sudden having to look at roommates, and the only reason they're still in their homes is because of the eviction moratoriums that are dropping left and right, because the CDC never had the constitutional power to do those in the first place. And I believe we're going to see a huge spike in homelessness because of increased rents, because the market was responding to just an increased purchasing power that everyone had, and increased competitive purchasing power, especially on scarce products like housing, because housing is scarce, unfortunately. And unfortunately, boomers, my parents' generation, created a system and an environment where they cared so much about their property values that they made it impossible to create new construction in these neighborhoods, and then had kids above replacement level. So now there's not enough places left for people to live. And we're not seeing new construction, but we are seeing a huge influx of money with the stimuluses. The stimuluses alone can be tied to direct cost increases in luxury items. To libertarians like me, that was firearms and ammunition. Price went through the roof after the stimulus packages started going out. But in other sectors, it was things like rent. It was things like takeout. It was things like delivery fees, where the costs started going up because the demand increased because people could afford them. And once the demand increased and the cost went up, the extra money didn't matter because people could only continue to purchase as much as they could before.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's certainly an argument. However, I mean, there's also the fact that putting money into, certain communities that don't have money can actually spur economic development, can actually give people purchasing power that they didn't have before, such as rural areas. Like you mentioned, if you take a small town, doesn't have, a whole lot of small businesses, doesn't, because they don't have a lot of income, not a whole lot of spending power in there. If you do infuse it, a small town like that, with $1,000 a month per person, that actually will increase the spending power, in that area, and actually give people the opportunity to start a small business, because now people can actually afford things, in the town, and that can actually increase the economy, especially in smaller communities and rural areas that need it the most. So, I mean, infusing an area with funds, as long as it's, somehow taxed, which I know libertarians don't like taxes, but as long as it's somehow taxed, unlike the stimulus, which is really just like, I mean, honestly, I got my stimulus and they took it right back out of my taxes. So like, it wasn't like, it's not like it was any different. Like it wasn't.
That's what you get for paying taxes.
Right. It wasn't
remember, everyone.
Like funding. It wasn't coming from a different area or a different space. It was literally just my money that they were just like handing to me, and then being like, "Oh, well, let me just take that back in like 2 months because actually, like my bad. Like you shouldn't have gotten that." So yeah. So I think that there's certainly an argument to be made there, but I think that there's also an argument on the other side as well that you can actually spur economic development and growth as long as you somehow delete this money that you're printing. If you're printing money, the problem is if you're printing money and you're not deleting it anywhere, that definitely can cause an issue that we saw with the stimulus and increased unemployment and other things that are going on. So yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying. It's certainly complex and it can cause harm. However, I think UBI is a different thing than both the stimulus and the rent assistance. I think it's in the same ballpark, but I think it's a different realm because it's universal and it should be, essentially it should be funded properly and it shouldn't be just like coming out of nowhere being printed.
I would like to say, people, that is a great reminder that taxes are the price you pay for the Afghani women to live in a militarized society. So always remember, like, you pay these taxes, they don't actually go to these programs to help people here in your neighborhoods and here in your country. That's all debt financed. Your taxes are going to buy weapons and military hardware to bomb children overseas. All right. Now, we do have a question from Masha, kind of a direct question here. What differentiates you from a liberal?
From a liberal? Okay. Well, liberals in general, I mean, liberalism essentially is the belief, in my view, that society or externalities outside of the individual essentially create the individual. However society is, that is how the individual is, and any problems that are had with the individual should be solved by fixing problems with society. And conservatism is sort of the opposite. If a person has an issue, it's an internal problem that they can fix on their own, that the individual should fix that issue, and then society will eventually improve because of individuals doing that. So I would say what makes me different from a liberal is that I have integrated, conservatism as well as, liberalism. I think that classical liberalism, or just liberalism in general, is kind of like an illness. It's just like almost like a mental illness because you're not taking any ownership of your own individuality and how you can improve as a person to improve your situation. And I fully reject that, any of the way that society is, then is who I am. And the only way to fix me is to fix something in society. I don't think that that's the case. I think that if I have an issue, I should fix it on my own. And then I have a say in what society should do. And only then can I have a seat at the table and have a conversation about that. So I would say that I don't consider myself a liberal, but it's pretty tough. I mean, I think that these labels are becoming almost nonsensical. Like, we can talk circles like around them all day, and we could argue about what category we fit into and what we don't. But at some point, we have to put all of these things together, I think, and we have to integrate more and be a little bit more big tent and actually come up with solutions rather than like ideologies. And I, only fit into certain groups, black and white, blue and red, liberal or conservative. But yeah, I would say that I believe in, solving, the individual has definitely a function in solving their own issues. And only then, once they have gone through that and, going through that process, are they then equipped to look at society and tell society what society should do. And that's a very small percentage of people that really have the right to do that. So
what are your most right-wing views that you hold that differentiate you from your modern day liberal Democrat?
My most right-wing views. I mean, I would say that's pretty tough. I mean, depends on what you mean as far as right-wing. I mean, it's tough because, then give me an example.
Well, where do you land on the Second Amendment and guns and gun control?
Mm-hmm. I'm actually changed my opinion quite a bit. I've actually become much more pro Second Amendment than I ever was. In the last 2 years, I've kind of not totally flipped. I was kind of like in the middle on it. I was kind of unsure about, where the line is, but being in the past year and a half, I guess, and seeing how important it is and why the founding fathers put that into the Constitution and what it actually means and how important it is for liberty and freedom, I've become very pro Second Amendment, actually. So that's kind of a new development. So you could say that.
I feel like you're not alone there. I feel like a lot of the left, especially minorities, racial minorities, given the past 2 years of the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the conflict with police, have started to come around to the need to defend themselves and the need to be able to defend themselves.
Yeah.
To me, it's people don't realize Ronald Reagan is the father of modern gun control. Republicans like to hold Ronald Reagan up on a pedestal, but Ronald Reagan passed the first assault weapons ban and the first public ban on open carry in California, directly in response to the Black Panthers policing their own neighborhoods and trying to protect people from racist police officers. Like, gun control is an inherently racist ideology in this country, and given the past year of mass violence with police against protesters, people are finally starting to come around to that realization, and we're starting to see a lot less push from gun control from like your typical left-wing voters, but the politicians aren't getting the memo.
Yeah, that's tough. Gun control is a sticky one. I mean, it's certainly pushed extremely hard when you're a Democrat, and one reason why I'm no longer a Democrat and I'm currently non-affiliated with a party because that's my only option in Oregon. Pretty much, I don't have like any other good options at this time that fit who I am and who I want to be. So yeah, I mean I'm in Portland, so I mean there's riots on the streets. I mean, I literally went down to downtown Portland right after the first riots basically happened after George Floyd, and I mean it was completely destroyed. I've never seen anything that crazy like that. I mean, I don't think there was this Apple store, you can look it up, but there's this Apple store that was all glass and it was just beautiful. It was like right in the middle of downtown, and it's been destroyed like probably 5 times by now, but at the time it was just completely smashed. It's been lit on fire since and everything, but like it was just completely smashed when I went down there, and I was just like, this is insane. And there was just like, obviously like all cops are bastards, George Floyd written everywhere, and like every single ATM was completely smashed. I mean, it was clearly anti-capitalist and not, anything to do with Black Lives Matter, in my opinion. It was just like, it literally just was anti-capitalist in every regard. And I mean, I guess you could say that that's something that separates me from a lot of the left, is I am a capitalist, and I'm not afraid to say that I am. So I'm not like well,
that might be where we disagree, because I'm not a capitalist. And I actually hate the usage of the term, and I hate when people use the term because it doesn't mean what they want it to mean. And I got in this argument on the Tower Gang the other night with Jose, but like my point is, like, when people use the word capitalist, what they're using the word capitalist to mean in modern day really depends on where they fall in the political spectrum, because you have people on the right who have spent the past 60 years trying to reclaim the word capitalism to mean free markets, open exchange, voluntarism, and agorism, when in reality, when Marx coined the term, he coined the term in Das Kapital to describe corporate structure, profiteering, human greed, and oppression of others through financial systems. And that's what the left still thinks it means. And so I try and not call myself a capitalist, and I try and not use the word capitalist when defending my ideology, because the only people I'm trying to convince are people on the left who are anti-capitalist. And by just acknowledging that what they believe capitalism is the historical and current definition of capitalism, we can say we live in a capitalist society today, because we do, because Amazon and Google control the fucking government.
I mean, that's more like corporatism to me. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, but no, you're right. Words do matter. I mean, essentially, like I'm more capitalist than, like a socialist, obviously, but words do matter. I mean, I prefer if there was a better word. If you have one, let me know. But yeah, it's I think it's like some kind of sick corporatism is really going on. It's capitalistic, but it's also highly corrupted, to the point of being, indistinguishable from an actual economic system that would be based on freedom. It's based on, I think, oppression and messed up incentives and power structures. But so yeah, I guess the Second Amendment, yes, I've come quite around on that. I do, think people should have the right to defend themselves, and that if shit goes down and, they decide to come and tell everybody, hey, we're going to do this to you, we're going to jab you with this needle right now, tough shit, then yeah, you should have obviously a way to defend yourself, and also just your own personal safety. I think a lot of people have felt personally unsafe recently, and it's important to be able to protect yourself. There's that, and I mean, I'm not a socialist. I'm somewhere in the middle, I guess. I do believe in some sort of social, obviously, UBI. That's obviously, something to do with socialism in a way, if you want to categorize it that way. But yeah, words do matter. So good point. That is a good point.
All right. Well, and you'd mentioned there people might need their guns if somebody wants to force them to get a jab. Yeah. I think that's where I've seen the biggest distance from you, at least on Twitter and social media, from the typical left. And unfortunately, the pandemic and the vaccine and everything has become a pseudo-partisan issue, where people have drawn lines based on politics of where they fall on mandates, vaccine passports, vaccine mandates, and stuff like that. You've taken the libertarian approach against government mandates, against forced vaccination, and against passports. What brought you to that conclusion?
I mean, honestly, that's just a foregone conclusion to me as a civil libertarian. I mean, that you don't force people to make a personal fucking medical choice. I think that should be obvious. And it was really interesting to me during my campaign. I actually had some medical freedom people come to me and say, do you support medical freedom? Because nobody else did in the Democratic race. And they're like, do you support medical freedom? If you do, we'll vote for you. And I'm like, okay, yes, I fucking do. Of course I do. And and I don't know how much of a vote that got me, but they spread my name around their groups and all this stuff. And it was just basically anti-vax kind of medical freedom-ish thing. I'm not really sure what it was, but I was like, yes, of course, nobody should mandate that you get a vaccine, certainly not the government. I mean, that's just not, I don't like that. And they're like, okay, great. But yeah, I mean, it's just sort of obvious to me. I mean, I think it has really brought out the libertarian versus authoritarian, spectrum more than left, right. So that's kind of what you're seeing is that oh, actually most Democrats and Republicans are very authoritarian.
I think most people are very authoritarian.
Yeah. I mean, it's really easier in some ways, I guess. I mean, to just submit. I think it's tough though. I mean, there's supposedly 50% of people that don't want to identify with either Democrat or Republican. And they just kind of fall into a very large mixed up group of, some libertarians, some other things. But I think in that group, the actual half of the country, I think a good portion of those people are non-authoritarians if you really get down to it. And that's why they don't like Democrats and Republicans. And that's what kind of turns them off when you really dig at it. They don't in some way being told what to do by either of them. They don't either like the evangelical kind of puritanical shit in the Republican Party, or they don't the Democrats telling them they can't have guns, or, taking all their money in taxes, or whatever it is. It's there's some kind of pushback against the government. There's institutional mistrust. There's that kind of very American, like, no, F you, I'm going to do what I want. Type of idea that's coming out, I think, more and more. And this COVID is really, I think, pushing it out there even more. This whole vaccine stuff is really making it very apparent.
So I think that really gets to the root of what we wanted to talk about. Like, the big idea here is bottom unity. How do we get people together, like, not on right to left, but on authoritarian versus anti-authoritarian? Because I'm an anarchist. I believe the political systems are inherently flawed and they don't help. I believe democracy as a system reinforces authoritarianism because it will always be majority will imposed upon an unwilling minority. How do we get the unwilling minority? Because there always will be an unwilling minority to become the majority of anti-authoritarian sentiment.
It's a really great question. I mean, I wish I knew the exact way. I do it right now. I get working on it. Yeah, I mean, I think that one way is to really just talk about this stuff, no matter the consequences. And I think that's happening to a lot of people recently that are like really pushing back against whether it's like critical race theory with like Brett Weinstein, that kind of crowd, or whether it's the vaccine mandates, pushing back against that. I think just really being fearless and having our voices known and being willing to, be out there and saying, no, like, this is where I draw the line. Personally, this is not okay, and not just backing off, because I think a lot of people there is a line for a lot of people, but when they hit that line, they don't say anything. They don't get to that point and push back and say, like, no, that's actually my line. Like, you can't actually go further than that. They're kind of just like, well, I don't want them to go further than that, but I guess I shouldn't say anything now because I'm scared, like, because I've let them do all these things up until now. So I'm either going to just go along with it or shut the hell up. So I think not shutting the hell up would really help. I think if a lot of people really just said how they actually feel about it, then we'd find that people are a lot more libertarian minded than not. So getting people to talk about it and to care and to not see it as a left or right, blue or red bullshit, like partisan, type of thing where you got to hate this other person, just kind of opening people to the conversation of liberty. And like, what does that actually mean? Like, where is your line? Like, where do you draw the line as far as, the government taking authority over your life? And I think that could help. And I think we're seeing some of it. We need more. We certainly need more people to speak up. So somehow encouraging that would be a start.
Well, I'm never going to shut up. I think that's clear. They can suspend me from Twitter for calling Meghan McCain a mean word all they want, but I'm never going to stop.
They did?
Yeah, I got a 12-hour ban for calling Meghan McCain a mean word after she blocked me. Which means somebody else reported it, which is crazy.
Right.
But no, like, in my Twitter handle, I identify as an extremist, and I'll never shut up. But like, I never change my tune. I've always had the same principles, the same messaging. In the past few years, as I've been involved in politics, I've run for U.S. Senate, I ran for Congress, I've run for local office here. I've never changed my tune. I have always just preached the same message of human freedom and voluntary action and a system of morals based on consent. And that's extreme to people. Like, when you get to the breaking down of the logical conclusion of what that means, when I'm pitching a system of voluntary consent-based ethics, that's extreme. Because, as I said, democracy is a system that reinforces authoritarian ideals. People vote to impose their will on the other without any need for consequence. I remember a few years back, I was at a rally in Boston, Massachusetts with Vermin Supreme, and there was a free speech rally. They had like 20 people show up for the free speech rally, and 40,000 people showed up to protest. And at one point, the Boston police decided they were going to escort the people of the protest out in protective custody. And when the Boston police were loading them into vans, 40,000 people on the Boston Commons started chanting in unison, "This is what democracy looks like." And I just sat there and I looked at Vermin. I'm like, that's fucking terrifying, because this is what democracy looks like. This is mob rule. This is a majority using the force of their numbers to impose their will and to disenfranchise a minority and to not let their voices be heard. That's all it is, and that's all democracy is.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is, I mean, how do you feel about, like, like more of a lottery system or an actual lottery system for representation? Is that something that you've thought about?
I heard somebody once make a joke that the perfect system of government would be an absolute monarchy with a healthy dose of assassination. If there was consequences for pissing off the people.
You gotta have the fear, yeah.
But no, I've come around to the kind of monarchist views and dictatorial views and authoritarian government, the potential and possibility of benevolent dictatorship. It does exist. If we could make Ron Paul dictator for life, I would vote for that in a heartbeat. If we could make Justin Amash dictator for life, I would vote for that in a heartbeat. Hell, at this point, I'd vote for Tulsi Gabbard to be dictator for life. And I look at places like Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein is the paradise of libertarianism in the world right now. It's a very small, very homogeneous, not really a diverse country with a very, very high standard of living, very high median income, and they have an absolute monarch, Prince Hans Adam II. He's the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein. He is an anarcho-capitalist. He wants nothing to do with being in power. He wrote a book called The State in the Third Millennium, where he talks about power structures and the state as being a necessary evil to protect people, but that he actually believes democracy is the best system, and he once posed a constitutional referendum in Liechtenstein to abolish his own monarchy and replace it with a parliamentary democracy, and it lost. 76% of the people voted against it. He followed that up with fine. The opposition leader gave a speech about how they weren't willing to risk the perils of democracy when they had a benevolent leader.
That's pretty amazing.
And so you look at the possibility for that does exist. But human greed and human ambition leads us to getting more things like Vladimir Putin in charge, or Xi in China with absolute power, and using that absolute power to oppress dissent and to literally kill people that disagree with them.
Yeah, that is terrifying. I mean, it's just, it's scary. That's, another reason why I don't align with the Democratic Party anymore is just the realization that, things like wanting to get rid of the filibuster, and things like wanting to stack the court, and just wanting to get rid of the electoral college. It's just wait, do you see no problems with any of this? Just because you're on the right side of things right now in your mind, the right side, then you think it's okay. But this is tyranny. That's insanity to just be okay, let's just make it pure democracy, or things like direct democracy. That's also kind of terrifying too, where we could just vote and first past the post, we could pass a law, everybody just
They're really the direct democracy to me is one of the most terrifying possibilities of government. There's a TV show called The Orville, written by Seth MacFarlane, where Seth MacFarlane applied to be a writer for Star Trek. They told him no, and so he said, "Screw you, I'll go create my own Star Trek." And he wrote a Star Trek spinoff.
Really?
It's basically Family Guy in space, but there's an episode where they visit a planet that's governed by direct democracy. Somebody does something offensive, one of the members of the crew, and somebody got it on video, and they had a worldwide vote on whether or not to execute them.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff. That's not even that far off to me. I feel right now a lot of people would be yeah, just kill the unvaccinated. Honestly, just line them all up. If they refuse to get vaccinated,
face the wall.
That's it. You literally are hearing that though. They're deny them care, and I'm deny them care. So you're basically saying just kill them. Just literally just kill somebody if they're unvaccinated. And what the fuck?
Mind you, these are the same people that destroyed our healthcare system with the demand of passing Obamacare, because they wanted to mandate and force coverage for pre-existing conditions,
right? Who
are now trying to deny people care based on a pre-existing condition. And I'm not saying on my work, my day job is in healthcare risk management and consulting. Our healthcare system needed an overhaul. It still needs an overhaul. Obamacare was an absolute terrible dismantling of it.
I'm an insurance agent, so I have my license in it, and it's crazy. It's the prices went, I think, 5 times more expensive since Obamacare, at least premiums.
And commissions went down.
Went up, commissions went way down. It was it's $5, but to sell an Obamacare policy is literally $5.
But I know, do you work with Medicare Advantage and Medicare Supplement at all?
I did not. My wife did that. I just did under 65. So I did either Obamacare, or for people that it wasn't an option for, they didn't want it, I would do short-term medical, which in some states you can have for like 3 years. And those are like those can be really good plans for like younger, healthy people as an option. They're way cheaper and still better than nothing. But they're basically illegal in a lot of states. They're pretty much illegal. Like all the blue states are like, you cannot have this short-term medical. And like people would call me and they're like, can I get this? And I'm like, sorry, that's illegal in your state. And they're like, what? It's illegal in my state. I'm like, call your congressperson or call your assembly member or whatever. Like, call somebody else. Like, it's not my law.
In 2020, when I was running for Senate, 2018, when I was running for Congress, healthcare was the big debate. And that's all anyone wanted to debate was healthcare, reform Obamacare, get rid of Obamacare. What are we doing? What are the Republicans going to do? How are we going to fix healthcare? And that was right around the time where the Medicare for All push really came from the left, and the left started pushing Medicare for All. That was the rise of AOC, Ilhan Omar, and the squad of the radical left, and Medicare for All became the demand. And it blew my mind how many times people would come to events and there'd be young people in their 20s and 30s demanding Medicare for all. And I'm like, are you sure? Yes, we need Medicare for all. I'm like, okay, there's an old woman in her 70s over there. Why don't you go ask her how bad Medicare fucks her? Like, why don't you go talk to any licensed health insurance agent who sold Medicare Advantage and Medicare Supplement and ask them how awful Medicare is for the people on Medicare.
Yeah. Man, I've had these debates, and what they mean by Medicare for all is not Medicare. First of all, they mean like
it's what they'll get. What they mean and what they'll get.
I had this long argument with the other person I was running against, who's a literal socialist, like Antifa person who I ran against, and we had like this long thread. Anyway, she was actually mad that Marianne endorsed me, so it was on Marianne's. It was actually on Marianne's thread. So Marianne was like, "I endorse Heidi Briones," like, and then she starts fighting with me because she's like, "Heidi's for keeping private healthcare," and like, and so we were good, and we were like fighting back and forth. I'm like, "Okay, so she's like, what would your plan?" Like, I was like, "Okay, so I actually am for a basic universal healthcare system and then private healthcare as well. Like, I'm for
so just a public option."
Basically, yeah. We're not getting too deep into it because it's not necessary. So yeah, basically a public option. And then, having private healthcare still exists to fill in the gaps that the government just cannot do. And her argument was that her Medicare for All plan would cover everything. And I was like, everything? So like, you realize that if you have like how insurance works, like I don't care who's paying for it or where it's coming from, that you have to have like guidelines on what you can cover and what you can't. And she's like, no, mine would just cover everything. And I'm like, that makes no fucking. You can't have cannot have. There has to be a line that you cover something, or you cover this much, or you only cover these like specific medication. There has to be formularies and like lines drawn in the sand and like something. And like what they really want is just like, I want every single thing covered for free, anything I would ever want, and it's just paid for by the government, and there's nothing that would ever be denied, like ever, and I would pay no copays. And I'm like, that's insanity. Like, I mean, my universal system would have copays and private insurance would still exist. Like, that's how,
So what that describes is a true single payer system that just covers everything. In reality, a single payer system would need the checks and balances of like, we're not covering this. We're only covering generics of these medications. Yeah. You have the ability to private pay for additional services that aren't covered, but like a true single payer system for routine, basic, and emergency services, whatever. I get in a lot of heat with a lot of libertarians and people on the right all the time when I'll debate healthcare from the perspective of experience and expertise as, listen, I have my health insurance license in all 50 states. I work in risk management and consulting. I've been doing this for years, and I help with plan design. Like, one of my jobs is doing plan design for major carriers like Aetna and United Health Group. Single payer would be cheaper. Single payer would absolutely save money and lead to better outcomes than the fascist dictatorial healthcare system that we have today.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's still a good idea. Prior to the passage of the HMO Act in the 1970s, the United States had the best and cheapest healthcare in the world because we didn't do things like protect intellectual property of drugs. We allowed generics to get to market quicker. We didn't do things like ban the import of cheaper generics from other countries with similar standards. We allowed people from Canada. We allowed companies from Canada and Europe to import their drugs for sale to the U.S. Mm-hmm. We didn't have networks. people, like, insurance only covered emergency care at that time. People were cash pay with their primary care provider, and it was usually something like $20 a month.
Yeah.
To be a member of your primary care's office and get your checkups, and prescriptions were dirt cheap. Emergency prescriptions were covered by insurance, and emergency room trips were covered by insurance. They treated insurance like we treat car insurance. Your car insurance doesn't cover your oil change. Your car insurance doesn't cover your tune-ups. It covers when you get into an accident and something unexpected happens.
Yep, and that's how it should be. Yeah, definitely.
All right, so we've got Heidi coming around to true libertarian free market healthcare.
I think that was my argument with her, though. It's like you need that. You need, like, it to cover private insurance to be actual insurance that covers, for the incidentals and the accidents. Okay, I got a question.
Yeah. Okay. 6 says, I'm a disabled vet. Let me tell you about government subsidized healthcare. 6, nobody is going to deny that the VA is awful. I private pay and I cash pay and self-insure at local hospitals and negotiate prices, so I don't have to go to the VA. That is something I will never do in my life again after that experience.
Yeah, it's terrifying. People just don't go. Like, I talked to this guy was literally homeless, calling me for, like, to buy health insurance. It was crazy. It was wild. And, like, I was just like, dude, like, finally I was like, he kept trying to be like, I'm gonna get enough money. Like, I'm hustling. Like, I'm like, oh my God, dude, just, like, honestly, like, just go to the emergency room. Like, cause he's like, I can't get to the VA. Like, it takes forever. And I'm like, just go to the emergency room and get taken care of. He was, like, having a heart problem. It was bad. I was like, dude, you're like really sick. Right there, he had his foot was, like, getting, like, rotting away. It was so wet. It was so sad. And I was like, you got to go in now, bro. You're going to lose your foot. Like, this is messed up. Like, just go to the ER, like, and just get it taken care of. So people are, going to the ER rather than going to the VA. So, yeah, I definitely get that.
And that's really, like, a homeless person with something degenerative on their foot rotting away is worried about the cost. A homeless person is worried about the cost of going to the VA, and that's or the emergency room, and that should show you that the real problem in our healthcare system is the lack of transparency, because he doesn't know what he's going to pay. He doesn't have the ability to shop around for prices for treatment, like the prices are completely freaking arbitrary. I remember last winter I had to go in for a surgery. I go to the hospital down the street from my home, and I cash pay. They asked me for insurance. I'm like, I'm cash pay. I'd like to see everything. I'll submit for reimbursement later, because I know what my yearly maximums are on my plan. I know what my coverages are on my plan. Not everybody is versed enough to be able to do this, but I was able to get them to give me their Blue Book register and said, okay, if you had United Healthcare, this would cost $14,000. If you had Blue Cross, it would cost $4,000. If you had Aetna, it would cost $9,000. If you had Medicare, it would cost $27,000.
Completely arbitrary. Yeah, if you're going to using Medicare, of course, because the government has to pay, like, their portion. So it's like it's guaranteed that they'll pay. No, it's insane. Yeah, it's totally arbitrary and messed up. It's like the cost is really the issue. I mean, like, I didn't really fully understand that until I started selling health insurance, but it's really the actual cost of the medical care that is the issue, and that it's not, like, anywhere near like across the line as you experience. Like, it's dependent on how much they can get from whoever is going to pay, that, like, primary portion, and the rest is just, like, completely just ridiculous and ludicrous. Like,
now, are you familiar with the Oklahoma Surgery Center?
No.
Oh, the Oklahoma Surgery Center is a private surgical facility in Oklahoma, and they do this crazy thing called they don't accept insurance at all. Okay. They will not accept insurance. They're eligible for reimbursement if you have a PPO, whatever, but they refuse to accept insurance. And if you go to their website, they have all of their standard procedures: knee replacement, shoulder replacement, Tommy John surgery, anything with a price next to it. And the price is all inclusive, including anesthesia, including prep, including the hospital recovery, and including the hotel room and flight from wherever you are in the country to get there.
Wow, that's insane. Yeah.
And they have managed to thrive because people who can't afford the out-of-pocket to go get that done are realizing that getting that done, it's like, I had a friend who looked into it. He went and had his knee replacement at the Oklahoma Surgery Center because the cost of flying from Boston to Oklahoma City, staying in the hotel for a week, getting the surgery, recuperating there for 2 days, staying in the hotel for another week, flying back to Boston was cheaper than his deductible.
Jesus. Yeah. I mean, that's a whole other mess.
And that was on an employer-sponsored plan, not even on Obamacare. That was on an employer-sponsored plan.
The employer plans are getting worse and worse. Like, I mean, I have probably the best one I've ever had right now, but I mean, usually it's trash. Like, they keep getting worse and worse. Like, I would have people call, ask me for Obamacare. They'd have employer-based insurance, and like, they would tell me what it was, and I'm like, do not ever leave that plan or that job, or you are totally screwed. Like, because it'd be something from like the 80s or 90s that they kept forever or whatever. It'd be like, yeah, I have a $200 deductible and like $1,000 max out of pocket. I'm like, okay, you can't ever leave your job. Like, you can.
I have a family member right now who's fighting with Medicare because they have a union plan that they've had eligibility for decades, a union Blue Cross plan with no lifetime maximum that's supposed to cover 100% past their deductible, and their deductible is only $1,000. That's something they're eligible for, something they paid into for decades, and that they wanted to keep through retirement. And Medicare instructed their dialysis facility that they are not allowed to bill it, that they have to bill Medicare.
Oh my God. What? That's insane.
And Blue Cross is actually taking their side, and Blue Cross is fighting like, no, we're trying to pay for it. And Medicare is like, no, we have to pay for it. They have to pay 20%. That's
sick. Yeah, Medicare is crazy. It is, yeah. The fact that they've branded it as Medicare for All, I was just like, that's just like such a bad branding. Like, you could like really just call it like anything else. Like, I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's just such a turn off. I mean, if you know anything about Medicare, it's just like.
And the reality is there is a proof of concept of a system that works. True free market healthcare does work. And I agree, like a public option or a public insurance option to cover emergency expenses because you don't have the ability to shop around for emergencies. I get that. That actually makes sense.
Yeah.
But for like routine care, for maintenance care, and for like routine surgical care, you don't need insurance for. You can have the market cover that. You can have private charity cover that more effectively than the government. If you want to go with the true single payer system, as I said, it's an improvement over what we have. But if we go back to what we had before the 1970s, you'll see leaps and bounds and improvements in both cost and outcome. And Ted Kennedy and Edward Kaiser should never be spoken their names without saying because of what they did. Because Edward Kaiser lobbied for the passage of the HMO Act. Ted Kennedy pushed it through the Senate, and it came with subsidies for HMOs. So when the HMO Act was first passed, it had block subsidies to be paid out to HMOs to cover the cost of treatments. At the time, the only HMO in the country that was operating was Kaiser Permanente.
Of course. Yeah.
And so Edward Kaiser took the $5 million he spent lobbying Ted Kennedy and turned it into $1 billion in 2 years.
Oh my God. No, this is the problem. Yeah. That's how these things happen. Like, it's terrible. But I mean, you hit the nail on the head though. I mean, if we go back to how it was with primary care, I mean, primary care is like impossible to find now. Like, people do primary care at urgent care centers. That's like the
move to New Hampshire. So hey, and that's
so hard to find primary
care offices. Your typical primary care offices and doctors' offices and independent and private practitioners are shutting down because they can't afford to pay the bills because the insurance reimbursements are so low and their cost overhead is so high. That's why they're going out of business and being forced to join these conglomerates and work out of hospital networks.
Yep.
However, we are seeing a big push here in New Hampshire for direct primary care, and independent primary practitioners are coming back, and they don't accept insurance. You just pay a monthly fee to the doctor's office to be a member of their direct primary care.
Wow. That's really cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, I mean, primary care was huge. I mean, back in the day, I mean, even, I remember having my own primary care doctor. You would always be like, oh, who's your doctor? It was like an actual thing. Like, now it's like, who the hell knows? Like, I don't care. Like, I just go in and like some dude sees me for like 5 minutes and like writes me a prescription. Like, I don't think I know who that was. Like, that's normally most people's experience of it, I think. And it's sad because, like, I think, 80 or 90% of, the problems that come up could have been solved by a simple blood test or like a simple primary care checkup. Like, oh, this is going on. You know what you need to do? Like, this, it's also free or very cheap for you to do this. Like, it could be like, a small generic little pill. Okay, solves it. You're not gonna have a heart attack now. And you wouldn't have known if you didn't go to your primary care. You would just wait and have a freaking heart attack and then go to the hospital, because you don't see anyone. It's crazy.
In small towns, the doctor used to come to your house.
Oh yeah, I think that's really ideal too. Yeah, that was a cool system.
So, all right. The only way we're going to get back to there is with bottom unity. So, we're at our hour. Heidi, thank you so much for coming on. It has been so fun having you on. Tell people where they can follow you and keep up with what you're doing.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter. It's at Heidi Briones, and I also have a blog that I am going to be updating a lot more soon. But you can go to HeidiBriones.com, and if you want to subscribe there, it's free, and you can just find out whenever I write something long form, or if you prefer just shit posting and short form conversations, then you can follow me on Twitter, and we can get an argument. It'll be super fun. Maybe I'll end up on your podcast. It'll be good times.
All right. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you so much for coming on, Heidi. Next time. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to catch more, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications for future episodes. You can follow me directly on Twitter at O'Donnell, the number 4NH, to keep up to date with what I'm working on. And if you want to be among the first to support this channel, check out our Patreon link in the description. And as always, don't forget to head on over to sneckswag.com to get your freshest Liberty swag today. Until next time, be free, everybody.